It's a big pleasure for me to be here on this beautiful fall day. I always get very nostalgic when I come to St. Gallen. I grew up in Teufen, after that I was in the Kantonsschule Trogen. And I would like to speak about how to improve innovation decisions. There is very much talk about ideas and innovation and labs. And I try to keep this presentation as short as possible so we have enough time also to discuss. The first part I would like to talk about is simplification. When I work with organizations, startups, large organizations, what strikes me is the amount of complexity, unnecessary complexity, which is brought into change and innovation processes. So, to be able to get better decisions when it comes to innovation and change, I think it makes sense to start with simplifying. It starts with basic questions. What are we actually looking for? What topics are we working on? Very often there are completely different concepts in different people's mind about the goals and the targets of innovation work. Then, in many cases, people who work on innovation projects have no idea of what the big picture looks like. How is this project embedded? What are we working on now? What comes then? What comes later? And what might we consider doing one day? And so, obviously, if I work on innovation, if I need to take decisions, but I don't have access to the big picture, a big picture which in many cases might even be a little bit fuzzy, then it's very difficult to take the right decisions. The next topic where we could start with simplifying is what do we need to decide? So again, in many large corporations, there is so much information required to take a decision that it's quite often impossible to provide that information, or the effort to provide that information is in no context with the value that that additional information brings when it comes to decisions. So this is something we should discuss, we should negotiate before we start taking decisions, and actually even before we start with our innovation work. Who decides? Who takes the decisions? So, if we deal with regular business, obviously it's pretty clear who decides. If we deal with innovation decisions, very often it's not clear who decides because we're dealing with new territory and we're dealing also in many cases with cross functions between departments or divisions of organizations or even dealing with outside companies. So, before we get started, make sure you simplify and you decide on who decides. How do we decide? We heard a beautiful example. We decide by raising our hands. Very familiar to me, coming from a Landsgemeinde canton. It's absolutely a legitimate way to decide. But if you don't know how you will decide, then it's also very difficult to prepare decisions. And unfortunately, these questions, they're often asked only once results are available or during the process, and that can lead to quite a bit of frustration because you have those endless loops simply because relevant information was not negotiated. Now, I would like to stop this section with one quotation from Blaise Pascal. It was also allocated to others. I think Mark Twain was also linked to this quotation. If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. And so simplification is not simple. It takes time, it takes energy, it can be very painful to simplify, because in our human nature, we love to run, especially if we see opportunity, especially if there are ideas out there we could tackle. But if we take this time to simplify before we get started, then we can save lots of energy, lots of time, and lots of frustration. And you get better at it. So the second time or the third time, you'll be faster. The next area I would like to look into, and this was also beautiful, we just heard it before, slightly in different words. This is a question of inclusion. Diversity and inclusion is very popular at the moment, but what does this mean concrete for innovation work and for taking decisions when it comes to innovation work? There is a series of people you should consider consulting before you take decisions. So, for instance, those who are affected by a topic, the customers, staff, the customer's customers, they might have quite good inputs for your decisions. That doesn't mean you have to let them take the decision, but you can include them before taking decisions. You can listen. It's an expert's world, and there are so many cool experts out there. Unfortunately, in many cases, we only draw on experts we know. So, when I work with organizations and you have the experts board, in general it's people who have a similar background, who've known each other for years, in some cases where everyone even studied at the same university, and those, from my point of view, are not experts. They might be, yes, they're experts, but they're not experts who bring in the expertise you're looking for. To give you an example for an expert, a few years ago we were working with a chemical company, BASF. We were working on increasing reliability of their polyurethane plants, because they kind of knew our polyurethane plants, they have 3 worldwide. Once a year something goes wrong, nothing dramatic, then we have to shut down the system. It will take a week or 2, and then everything is up and running again. And actually, everyone felt quite comfortable, because these maintenance windows, quite surprising windows, in fact, they were quite welcomed. So they had a different attitude towards reliability. So our expert was not from BASF, it was not from the polyurethane environment, but our expert came from the outside, and it was a Lufthansa guy who spoke about reliability and who showed that there are completely different ways of managing reliability, very much in the sense of what you've been speaking about. And then suddenly they got a different attitude towards the importance of reliability. The clueless. It can be extremely helpful to invite the clueless when you think about innovation decisions. My favorite group of clueless, and they're available in every village, in every town, in every country. My favorite group of clueless people to involve in these types of processes are teenagers between 14 and 19 who definitely have never thought about polyurethane system security or have never thought about collapsible rooftops. But this cluelessness triggers so much energy because they ask excellent questions, they really want to understand, and they're able to challenge the current way of thinking. So the next time you take decisions, try to integrate a few people who have no idea what you're talking about. Make sure that they're bright. Make sure that they're curious, that they're awake. And then let yourself be challenged by them. It's lots of fun too. And then to include is the political side. So every organization has a political side. There are managers who can only accept their own ideas as being good ideas. There are managers who are generally against everything which is relating to change. I call them Dr. No's. There are people who, behind the scenes, make things happen or prevent things from happening. If you don't integrate these people into decision processes too, then most likely things won't happen. And so I think we have to get this transparency where we start talking about who is affected by this topic, who are real experts who can provide value, who are the clueless, and who is the political side we need to integrate. Now, taking decisions also has to do with processes and methods. And so my experience shows that it's very smart to separate the people who participate in decision making from those people who organize decision making. Because if these roles are mixed, then you suddenly have conflicts of interest. Whereas if these roles are nicely separated, and they can be separated on a per project basis. You don't want people to be in one role all the time. Maybe someone is an expert for this process and someone is a dedicated innovator for another process. But by separating these two roles, we found out it's much easier to take smart decisions. The last topic I would like to speak about is peace of mind. So if you want to take wise innovation decisions, you need peace of mind. It's not possible to take a wise innovation decision, and I'm not speaking of an emergency decision. This is like you change gear if you're in an emergency. But I'm speaking of daily innovation work, daily change work. Taking decisions where people have been working for years or months or weeks on a topic, you need peace of mind. And if you expect people to take decisions for you, you need to provide them with this peace of mind. And if you're in charge, you must make sure that you personally and your team has the peace of mind to take good decisions. So, this means enough time to experiment. To take innovation decisions, you need to be able to experiment. You need to be able to try out. You need to be able to figure out. And if you constantly have to watch your clock, and if you constantly fear that the boss will walk in and tell you what to do and how to do it, or if you constantly have to check your email, because there could be something out there, it's very distracting. You will not take good decisions. You need time to talk. If you don't have time to talk for human-to-human conversations, you will not take good decisions. You can use as many voting tools and online tools and buttons and sliders. You will not take good decisions if you don't get this personal conversation in a team where you have structured and good discussions. You need time to forget. Certain people, they've been working 90 days in a row because they have this presentation, this meeting coming up, and in the last moment everything is printed and plotted and fixed together, and then they rush to the presentation. I'm sorry, this is not a good prerequisite for taking wise decisions. Spend a day in the Alpstein before you have your presentation and put down the scope of your presentation a little bit, but get into a presentation, get into decision making after you had time also to forget about the topics. It can be for an hour or for half a day, or depending on what you've been working on, even for a week. If you have people working day and night on your topics, invite them to forget for a moment. Invite them to take distance, because if they come back, they will have a completely different attitude to what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. Peace of mind also comes from the privilege to fail. I was giving a presentation many years ago in front of BASF managers, and there was one guy from the Vorstand who was there too, from the board. And then there was one question from the audience. Mr. Vorstand, how much money does BASF have this year for failure in the budget? There is no money for failure. And if there's no money for failure, and if people aren't allowed to fail and encouraged to experiment, to fail and find out what works, then there is so much fear of not getting it right at the first shot that the risk of taking bad decisions is much, much higher than the money which you saved. So this culture of having the privilege to fail, I think, needs to be instilled in a much, much deeper level. Now, there are two aspects of business. There is production, and if I'm taking care of aircraft engines, sorry, there is no privilege to fail. If I produce vaccines, there is no privilege to fail, because it means next day people lose their lives. But if I'm working in innovation, and if I need to take innovation decisions, we need to give people peace of mind that they know we can totally screw up this project, and it's okay, because we tried, we learned, we found out, and we know what doesn't work, and by knowing what doesn't work, you get peace of mind for what works. And last but not least, money to spend. I had an interesting project for the Erste FC Köln. They have a large innovation department. I was quite surprised. And someone in that team had this fantastic idea of creating an Erste FC Köln app for the Apple Watch. I mean, mankind has waited for this. And so this team, with an enormous effort, they programmed everything. They programmed the app. They released the app. But unfortunately, the app didn't work on the Apple Watch because it was only programmed and tested on testing environments with computers. And so I tried to figure out what went wrong. And the answer was very easy. Do you know? We're innovators. We don't have any money, and no one of us dared to ask anyone in charge if we could have 350 euro to go out and buy a watch. How ridiculous. So I've come to the conclusion that if you have people working on innovation projects, the best is if you open your wallet before they ask. You put cash on the table and you tell them this is to improve decision making, this is to improve quality, and the only thing you want is you want to know what happened with the money, And obviously, for accounting reasons, you want the receipts. And I can tell you, you will be extremely surprised how imaginative and how focused this money will be used and how much better the decisions at the end of the day will be if your innovators have cash available for which they can decide how they want to use it, in what form and for what. So, simplicity, including the right people, and providing peace of mind or claiming peace of mind, those are, from my point of view, the three most relevant factors you can work on when you take innovation decisions. To conclude, how can you personally improve your innovation decision-making tools? I have 4 suggestions. Suggestion number 1, you go on YouTube, maybe not now, you find the 7-minute movie, The Expert, most likely some of you have already seen it, and observe closely what went wrong when they take decisions in that sketch and capitalize on the learnings. Suggestion number 1. Suggestion number 2 will take you a little longer, 144 minutes. Today, this evening at 8:30 p.m. at the Lokremise, 2.5 kilometers from here, they're showing this absolutely stunning movie, The Square, which is, for me, the most beautiful case of dysfunctional innovation decision-taking you can experience. It's a beautiful movie, worthwhile seeing. You can also wait until it appears through other channels, but this evening, 8:30 at the Lokremise, highly recommendable. The third way to improve your skills, if you're tempted, I'm offering the team in here, 12 of you, a 1-hour slot to speak about innovation decision-taking within the next 45 days. We will speak together by phone, and the next workday, 5 p.m., you will get a summary with my recommendations. This offer is on the pay-what-you-wish basis, so you get the results, you reflect on the value, you set the price. And last but not least, every month on the first Monday and Tuesday of the month, we have a 2-day training where you can learn a lot about innovation decision-taking, organization of innovation work. Any one of you is interested, on Monday and Tuesday next week, it's in Barcelona. In December, it will be in Biel. January 2, in March, it's in New York. So they take place at different locations, but it's always the first Monday and Tuesday of the month. Depending on where you live, you might need to travel a little bit further. Also, these 2-day trainings are on the pay-what-you-wish basis, and you have the postcards back there. So, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for the invitation to St. Gallen, and zurück ins Studio.